Well, hey, it is day 4 of our Walking Through James series, and today we're looking at chapter 2, verses 14 through 26. And James is a really simple book. Chapter by chapter, he unfolds what the life of a Christian should look like after he's born again through the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this is what a Christian does. He bears up under trials. We see that in chapter 1, verses 2 through 3. She's a doer of God's word, not just a hearer. We see that in verses 22 through 25. She doesn't show partiality. We saw that in verses 1 through 7 in chapter 2. And he keeps his tongue under control. And we're going to see that in chapter 3. And this passage we're looking at today is no exception to that simplicity. Even if some of its details cause us difficulty, the main point is very, very clear. Your faith, if it can even be called that, James is saying, is dead and meaningless unless it results in godly action. Now, the structure of the passage is not difficult. James lays out his principle in chapter 2, verse 14, saying, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but does not have works?" Then he illustrates it in verses 15 to 17. In verses 18 and 19, he deals with an objection to his point. And then in verses 20 through 26, he gives 2 examples from the Old Testament. And many Christians have already explained some of the more difficult details here, so I'm not going to take all this time to do that. But the most important thing to realize, however, is that James uses the word faith in 2 very different senses. On the one hand, he uses faith to refer to living, saving, and real faith. Notice what it says in verse 22. You see that faith was active together with his works, and by works, faith was made complete. But he also uses the same word faith to refer to a dead, false, useless faith. And you can see that in verses 14, 17, 20, and 26. So being able to distinguish which faith James is talking about in any given verse is the key to getting this passage right. And once you do, what James is saying becomes very clear. That a real, saving, living faith will produce godly works. Now, James is not saying that we have to add works to our faith in order to make it alive. That would be like saying you have to tape a plant onto a seed in order to make the seed alive. No, James is saying that just as a living seed will produce a plant, so living faith will produce godly action. And just as a seed that doesn't produce a plant is dead, so faith that doesn't produce works is dead. Simply put, calling yourself a Christian or simply having made a decision at some point to follow Jesus is not worth anything. Now, I don't mean to be impolite. That's just what it is. And James writes in verse 26, "For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead." And I grew up Christian. I grew up in a Christian home. So growing up in a Christian home is not enough. Going to church is not enough. A real, vital, genuine faith in Jesus will express itself in a life of godly works. So today, take some time to examine your heart and make sure that your faith is living and active. And then give thanks to God for the fruit that you see.